exciting.
Sorry,
It's
go ahead.
it's been so exciting, this whole journey, and brings me here with you today.
Been thrilling as your friend to watch. And, it really, that's the only word. It's been thrilling, and your friend's successes are your successes. So I feel that. So when I thought about having you join us today, I knew I wanted you to join us in some capacity, and it really didn't take me long to figure out how, because something I admire about you, in addition to all these things I've already mentioned, is your rich reading life. And I love to read, but I certainly do not make enough time for it. And that's why I wanted to have you here today, because I don't think I'm alone in that. We had, when we were younger, we had much more time to read. And I'd love for you to share with us your ideas about how we can use reading as a self-care tool and how we can make time for it as busy midlife mamas.
Yes, absolutely. And that has been, because I do love and adore reading just the same way you do. And there's been drier spells in my life, and then other very rich book experiences that I was just so invested in books for a long time. So I think the first thing we need to realize is that it's not always going to be the reading life we're wishing for when we do love books. Sometimes there's like drier periods. But one of the things that I think is really important in helping us see the value of reading and making space for it is to look at the research around reading and what it does for us as human beings. So in preparation for this, I just did a little research myself, and I'd love to share a couple of things with you as to why making some time, it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but making some time for reading is just one of the healthiest things that we can do for ourselves. So one of the big studies came out of Yale University School of Health, and they found that people who read an average of 3 hours a week, which is really not that much, and it doesn't have to happen like on a daily basis, but if we invest in just a little bit of time as often as we can actually add years to our life. And it also has this huge cognitive benefit. When we are reading, it requires so much of our brain, and our brain is shifting and growing and changing, even if the rest of our body isn't growing and changing in the same way. Obviously our bodies are changing at this time of life and in ways that we're not necessarily used to, but our brain can keep growing, and reading is that fertilizer for that.
Mm.
And not only that, it also creates a more empathetic person, and we all want to be that, right? We become more emotionally intelligent, which means we just build resilience. And that is what helps us get through hard parts of life, that we can actually protect ourselves from brain sorts of issues like dementia and Alzheimer's by reading often. And it actually lowers stress levels when we read, encourages positive thinking, that when we are feeling a little blue or down in the dumps, we can pick up a book and it can change the way we're looking at the world or the challenges around us. And it actually fortifies friendships.
Mm.
So, it's something that feels decadent because it just feels so good to be reading, but it also has such incredible benefits to our body and our minds. And even Weight Watchers did a study on people who read, and they found that they are able to manage their weight better.
I believe it.
Yeah, yeah. So I think first in thinking about reading, when we look at the benefits that it has for our body, it's like, well, if we can drink 8 glasses of water each day, because we know that hydrating our body is really important, then we can also prioritize some time for reading as often as we can. And I think the first step in making reading important is to know that it's not a certain type of book you have to read. You
Okay.
can read like, you know, Twilight over and over again. Or you can read, I just finished this amazing memoir called Memorial Drive, A Daughter's Memoir by Natasha Trothiwi. I'm not even sure if I'm saying her name right, but holy moly, like the books just can be anything that connect with you emotionally and make you want to keep going with it. So it's not like reading maybe when we were young and somebody else was choosing a book for us and it was the same book that's been in the hands of kids for as long as anyone can remember. There are so many opportunities for good books that are out there that we kind of need to like look at our own reading identity. Like what makes us love something that we're reading?
Mm,
What is the content that we want to read? What are we curious about? Because yeah, we can still be curious at this age, you
right?
know? And being curious brings joy because we find and continue to satisfy and learn, like satisfy those curiosities through learning. And books help us on that journey. And so when we discover, like, what is it that we love to read? And it might be, crime novels, it might be mysteries, it might be historical fiction, it might be nonfiction, it might be, gosh, anything, or it might be a mix of all that. And you're just going to go through kind of trends in your life. Like, there was a long time where I was all about young adult literature because the only difference between young adult literature and adult literature are the characters, main characters are young.
Right, right.
And the quality of the writing and the way it stretches my thinking was still just as powerful.
Mm,
So I went through this whole young adult phase, and especially reading authors of color, because growing up I never really read authors of color. I did get my Toni Morrison in because I chose that for me,
right.
you know um, and other important authors of color. But I was intentionally going back and being like, what could I have read as a high schooler if I was in high school right now? And
Oh,
I found extraordinary books. So it's kind of like just taking, and I know this is a common theme among everyone I've heard from in your conference, is that first we connect with ourselves and we find what our passions are. And then I can guarantee you there is a book, and not even a book, a collection of books that you can follow down your path of books that will suit that passion, that will fulfill you. And so I think sometimes, be, perhaps because of the way we've experienced reading in the past, sometimes the way we experience writing, right? Like we come with some hangups, like, well, the only reading books that I can be reading are the ones that are the classics, or the only books that I can understand are blah 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 blah. Or it's really just about finding what your interest is and reading anything that satisfies that interest, and you then reap all those benefits I just shared.
right. And
Incredible.
I love that point that you brought up because something I do in my work is kind of trying to let go of those old stories and those old beliefs about your
Yeah.
right, and that this is what I should be reading or the
Right.
type of reader I should be. And so then we wind up doing nothing.
Mhm.
Whereas if we could maybe tell ourselves a new story and like you said, really tap into what makes us tick and focus on our own values when it comes to our reading life, there's a possibility for a real shift there and some real nourishment to your point.
Yeah, exactly. And I also want to say that I have a friend whose name is Travis Crowder, and he's a middle school teacher. And one of the things he said that's really stuck with me, and I think it works for all ages, grown-ups included, that we should let the book do the work.
Mm,
So when we find something we're passionate about and we find a book, we let that book transform us. We let that book just take us away. And if that book, by the way, doesn't, this was another thing. I know some people might not agree with this, but if that book doesn't up to a certain point for me, I do put it down because I don't want my reading life to feel like I'm, walking through drying concrete. Sometimes I go back to the book, sometimes I don't. But we just let the book do what it does. The author has spent oodles of time creating that book for us. And all we need to do is let it do the work that it was intended to do.
Mm, I
And
love
so it takes very little effort. Like it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be arduous. It simply is just like, shed some of our already preconceived notions about reading and just let the book do what it's there to do.
and be okay with, I love what you just said. It's okay to abandon a book, even if it's something that your mom or your best friend is like, you have to read this. This is the
Yes.
best book. And so here we go again with this similar theme of feeling like we don't want to disappoint them because it's
Yeah.
such an awesome book that we're going to talk about and you don't like it. It's okay to put it down. It's not
Yeah.
supposed to be a chore, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. I love that you brought that up, and that just made me think in terms of relationships. I want to go back. I wrote down it having books and reading things to talk about is such a great way to fortify friendships, and I think that's where the midlife mama book clubs come from, right? Because
Yes.
it's an opportunity to deepen our understanding and our connection with people,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Absolutely. And to realize we're also deepening our connection to people we'll never meet. So Elizabeth Gilbert, one of my favorite authors, says that when you read her books, you are reading her. Every one of those characters is some version of her or intentionally the opposite of her.
Right.
And so, I'll pinch myself if one day I get to meet Elizabeth Gilbert, because I already call her Liz because she doesn't know we're friends yet. Um, but that's like you are like the author is giving themselves over to you in their books and letting you explore your own humanity at the same time. And then you bring up a really good point. It's, reading isn't a solitary experience. Yes, we do that on our own, but if they don't have to be formal, but they can be depending on what your style is. But to have some type of connection with someone else around books, and you don't have to read the same books. I have this friend, Liz Pappas is her name, and she lives in San Diego, and we've never actually met each other, but we've connected with one another. And one of our biggest connections is we have the same taste in books. And so I can trust her when she says, I know that this book did this for me. I know it can do that for you too. And so I think so it can be informal connection. So sometimes we read the same book and sometimes we don't. Or it could be something more formalized, like, and Liz introduced me to this website. Have you heard of Literati?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it's basically famous people or famous websites that create their own book clubs, and you can join those book clubs. So I'm in this the Cheryl Strayed book club, and that's where I just got the book Memorial Drive and finished that in like a day because it was so moving. But there's other book clubs you can join there. And what's cool about it is it will name the person, celebrity, or the focus, and then it will identify the types of books that that club reads.
That's awesome.
So then you can go in there and decide, oh, you know what, I really want to be in a club for this month or this year around and reading this passion that I'm drawn to.
Mhm.
So it can be formal or informal.
Right, exactly, and you can make right, you can make it fit your life and
Yes,
fit in, right?
yes,
Right.
yes.
Um, speaking of passion, for you personally, I know you just shared this one book. Are there any books or authors that really you feel have had like a significant impact on you, your life, your work, etc.?
Yes, definitely. And it's hard to write. It's hard to name them. So what I'm going to just share is like my latest passion reading that's happened, say, in the past like 4 months. Um, so I picked up this Tender Land, and Ken. I'm trying to remember his last name. Hold on one second. Um, it's Kent Kruger is his name, William Kent Kruger, and that takes place during the Great Depression. And in fact, I would think this is actually a really good book for young people too, because the characters are young. They're
Mhm.
the vagabonds, as he calls them. And it just got me really interested in that time period. And I listened to a podcast that he was on, and he recommended The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna.
Oh yeah, my
That
mom,
one,
yeah, she's obsessed with it.
oh, it's obsessive, that book, yes. And knowing that an author who wrote from that time period recommended another author who wrote from that time period, I was like, I have to pick this book up. And holy moly, it's an epic tale, and it's like about women and the strength they bring to the most difficult circumstances. And then from there, I was like, I wonder what else is out there that is set around the same time. So I picked up The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. Me Before You is probably her most famous book. It's about, and being a former librarian, of course, I loved this. It's about the horseback librarians in Kentucky during the Great Depression. And her characters are so rich and so real. So I picked that up, and then I was like, I'm really in the mood for a real person. So I read Alicia Keys. What was her memoir? See,
Uh,
it's terrible. This is why I have to write things down.
yeah.
Um, More Myself.
Mm.
And that's a listen, that's a read with your ears book, which is something else I think we should talk about, because that read with your ears book is, she's reading it and she's singing in
Oh,
it and playing the piano.
oh,
And she also has, yes, people that have been pivotal in her life come on and read things they've written to contribute to the book. Everyone from her birth father to her current husband, to Bono. And they come on. I think Oprah was on there too. So it's definitely like one to read with your ears. And then when this memoir came, recently, Memorial Drive, most memoirs are read by the author, and that's pretty cool. It just brings that deeper connection. So I know that's like a whoo
no,
wave that I just kind of went along a reading journey, but I know that there's so many opportunities that will be like right in your eyesight when you pick up a book that aligns with your passion. There's like, yeah, I think some of it's almost like a little creepy, because like all of a sudden on, social media, I'm seeing books that relate to the book that I just am reading. And yet there's also this like magical cosmic way that books find us because we're thinking about them and because we're interested in them. And so that definitely is just the easiest way to invite reading into your life and let it just fill you up and bathe your soul. And that's what it does.
yeah, absolutely. And I do want to pick up on something you just said, because you and I have talked about this as well. So again, when I've struggled to make time for my reading recently, most of the reading I've been doing as I'm carpooling and running back and forth, and trying to get my steps in, is I've been reading with my ears, as you so adorably call it. So kind of just explain what that means for everyone.
Yes. Yes. And my friend Liz calls it stories and steps. And so I think that one of the misconceptions about reading is that the only way to read is with your eyes on print. And an easy, simple, and really soul filling solution to that is having books that you're listening to. And they are pieces of art, by the way. It's not like when I was young and I would press play on a tape recording of a book that sounded so mechanical. Like, these are the people who read these books are artists at storytelling, whether it's the author themselves or it's someone that they've hired to do the reading. They help you picture characters with an even more like dimensional view, because of the way that they phrase, because of the easily changing accents that they'll choose, because of the pauses in certain places. Part of my challenge when I am reading with my eyes is I read so blasted fast that I know I'm missing stuff. And so sometimes I go back and reread a book, and sometimes I'm just like aching for the next one. But reading with your ears and reading with your eyes are two totally important, legitimate, and fulfilling ways to be reading. And sometimes, even when I'm in the car, because I have a 15-year-old, almost 16-year-old as well, I'll turn on my book instead of the radio, instead of, maybe sometimes it's just small talk, or maybe there's some tension. And when I put the book on to listen to, it just kind of it just pulls us together a little bit more. So, and honestly, I'm not even like, let's start from the beginning, and I'm not even explaining the story unless I'm asked. But I just put it on, and we're all just
And
washed over with it.
it's almost, it's almost like a backdoor way to like build connection, because your
Yeah.
teenager would never be like, let's read the same book and talk about it. Like,
Right.
realistically, that
Yeah.
ain't gonna happen. But to kind of do that in a roundabout way could potentially, yeah, open up some connection there. And even if it doesn't, just to have that quiet time together and um, respect and honor literature and reading, it's just a great opportunity for that as well.
Yeah. And that's also part of another reason to read, right? If we know that reading does all of these things, right? It has the cognitive benefit, it builds empathy, emotional intelligence, keeps us healthier, lower stress levels, it does all of this, then we want these same things for our children, right? Like, we want them to have the benefit of reading in their lives because of all of the things that it does for them in their mind and their body. And what better way can we show them how to fit that in than to do that ourselves?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, one of the best comments I got from my husband the other day when we were sitting and eating dinner was, I said, "Oh, I just finished this great book." And he's like, "I hear that from you all the time." So I was like, yeah, I guess my reading life has really been rich. And I have to say, this time last year when things were looking really scary and I was feeling really paralyzed, to be honest, I was very fearful for my parents, and what this pandemic could do to them in many ways. And you couldn't do anything. Like, you could drive, you could get in a car and drive. Like, that was about it, right? And books were like saviors for me.
Yeah.
And I met, I don't know if you remember Laura Robb, but she's like an educator of, like, for decades now. And I was talking to her, and she was saying that for people who read, they're going to come out of this time better than people who don't.
Yeah. I
And
understand that wholeheartedly.
yeah. And so I was like, heck yeah, that's what I can do. So I'm going to do it.
Right.
And it has really been something special.
Use the time as a gift
Yeah.
to, like as we look for that time, this was as scary and horrible as it was an opportunity for you to enrich that area of your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, we can be intentional too about how we choose to fit it in. Like you said, when you're carpooling, you're listening to it. So you are reading, and I know you're carpooling for more than 30 minutes a day.
Yes.
So you've like, what do you call that? You call that habit stacking, right? So, you have to do something, you have an obligation, or, something that needs to be done. Can you also be reading at the same time? Or is there a routine? Like, in our house, Frankie and my husband and I always like watch the news, the 6:30 news, just to see what's going on in the world. And then he actually goes to bed super early. I pick up my book. And, it's just kind of the routine in life, that even if that, like what I just suggested, wouldn't work for you, anyone listening, to tuck it in spaces that just become that habit, and reap the benefits of this beautiful reading habit.
And just to piggyback on that, because the book that I shared at the beginning of the conference, Atomic Habits, which I base a lot of my work on, and the habit stacking, that's where that comes from.
Okay.
James Clear, the author, he talks about, you know, people that want to establish more of a reading identity. So, people might say, I'm not a reader. But if they do want to become a reader, the easiest way to do that is to create habits around it. But he emphasizes to start small.
Mhm.
So literally, you could read one page a day.
Yes.
And then the next day, read one page, and the next day, read one page. And once that becomes a habit, I can almost guarantee you, you're not going to sit down and just read one page.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yep. That's where the book kicks in and does the work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I that's exactly right. Like there's a way to build in this healthy habit bit by bit. Um, and also just set up some great expectations for it.
Mhm.
Just imagine what it feels like to have reading in your life a little bit at a time, whatever that little bit is. It's just so, like I keep saying, fulfilling. It's just soul filling. It's just, I think, part of being human. And I also want to say, for anyone that doesn't feel like a reader, I just want to say that you're like one of the like crocuses in my garden. You are a dormant reader. It simply means you are there, you are in there, and you just need a couple of things to get ready to bloom. Everyone is a reader, and what you choose to read, and that's where that like definition that school might have has like kind of caused us to think that definition can be revised when we really rethink it and examine it. And I also just want to put a little plug out there because I know I'm talking a whole lot about narrative texts, so texts that are stories. So I just shared a whole bunch of stories that I've read, whether they were fictional or memoir. That yes, they're stories, and also nonfiction is a great text to pick up, either to read with your eyes or read with your ears. One thing that's important for us to know, because if we're feeling a little wobbly when it comes to reading, and we pick up nonfiction is actually denser to read and it takes more time because it's so content rich and we're learning content while we're navigating really sophisticated structure or syntax. So to be gentle on ourselves, if we want to pick up a piece of nonfiction, that we might not read it as quickly. It might not feel the same story flow because it's not, but just to know that we just go a little slower through nonfiction because it is so dense and full of just good stuff. And our brain is working to process all of that.
That's such an awesome point because I read a lot of nonfiction. And,
Yes, I see.
and it definitely takes me a longer time because I'm trying to learn, like process it and learn. And um, my kids will joke with me sometimes. They're like, "You've been reading that book forever." I'm like, "I know, but I'm trying to." So I a lot of the books I have both on Audible, and then I'll buy the hard copy because I want to
Yes,
go back and highlight the important stuff.
yes.
Glad you brought that up because it does. Sometimes I'm like, "Oh God, they're right. I have been reading this forever." But that's such a great point. It requires something different of you to bring to nonfiction than to
Yes,
fiction.
it does. And the book is asking you to really process,
Mhm.
like, and whatever nonfiction book it is, like if it's any of the, Brene Brown books that are just so revealing, reading them a few times and having them both on ears and eyes is a great way to go. And also knowing that even though it's slower, it's still doing the work
Right,
on us
right,
that we're hoping for.
right.
There's not a particular speed we need to be at. No one is timing us any longer. There are no timed reading tests happening here.
Right? For anything we do. That it's so funny. All these common themes keep coming up. And this is, you're talking about reading, but it's true of anything. I don't know if I don't remember which session it was, but I have a sign right here. Your direction is more important than your speed, right? Because
Beautiful.
this society, we feel like we have to
Yes.
do it all so quickly, but as long as we're headed in the right direction, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And speaking of heading in the right direction, I have to mention this because um, you recommended this book to me again when I was starting on this journey by your friend Liz. You could probably guess which one it is. I really want to share my whole reading stack, but that's for a whole nother conference.
Right? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Recommended this to me, and if
Yeah.
you have not read it and you are looking like you're at this conference because you know that there's something within you and something that you want to do, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, Creative Living Beyond Fear. It's amazing to really just tap into why you're here, what you're meant to do. Right, Patty? You want to add anything?
Yeah, it's how to not walk through the creative process and just expect like rainbows and unicorns, but she helps you see, yes, the hard parts are here. And she talks specifically about fear. Yeah, fear is going to be in the car with us, but fear will not be in the driver's seat.
Yep, I love that.
Right. And then she gives such incredible, I'm getting like tingles just thinking about this, such incredible examples of how the creative process, whatever that is, creating yourself, creating something outside of yourself, whatever that is, how there really are things at work that are there to help you continue to create and grow and find where you want to be and who you want to be.
Yep.
And oh man, yeah, that book is just
It's powerful.
wildly inspirational. Yeah.
It's a powerful one. That's why I wanted to mention it.
Yes.
So thank you so much for taking your afternoon to be with us and share this with us. I wrote down so many great tips, and I'm going to ask you at some point. I'll connect with you, and I want to put everything in the Facebook group, like some of the titles that you mentioned, and I have some lists here. But we'll connect on that because I really think it's important for everybody to reflect upon and enrich their lives. And I think I forget you used the word. I don't know if it was nourish or because that's really, we look to sometimes when we're struggling also with health and food and drinking, right? We look to that. We always look at that nourishment, but sometimes maybe reading could be a little piece of nourishment that fulfills us a little bit more that we don't, can balance our nourishment, if that makes any sense.
It totally does, because we're looking to nourish our bodies and our minds, right? And reading nourishes our bodies. And yes, healthy living nourishes our minds, but that when we bring reading in, we're really kind of filling in the gaps.
Yep, I love that. So thank you again.
Oh, thank you. This is so good.
Thank you for everything, really.
It's been something special.
Thank you. And all right, so it is 1:37, and I will see y'all back here at 2. Let me just check my handy dandy schedule. 2 o'clock, we will be back with Jessica Spillane. So now we just talked about strengthening our minds and enriching our minds. Next, we're going to talk about strengthening your core and your body, and also just evolving in terms of a human and maybe in terms of business or career. So that'll be a rich session coming up next. So
for sure.
All right. Thank you, Patty. Okay. And everybody listening or watching, I will see you in about 20 minutes. Bye.